The 1980s in America were a decade of excess, energy, and unapologetic fun, and nowhere was this more evident than in the wild parties that defined the era. Forget the image of a quiet gathering or a casual dinner parties in the 80s, where spectacles, performances, and statements all rolled into one. From sprawling Manhattan lofts to Miami's neon beaches, from Hollywood mansions to small-town basements, Americans knew how to throw a party that people would remember, sometimes for a lifetime. Let's start with the cities. In New York, the epicenter of nightlife, parties were loud, chaotic, and filled with a mix of celebrities, artists, socialites, and everyday thrill-seekers. Studio 54 might have peaked in the late 70s, but its influence carried deep into the 80s. The city's elite mingled with creative types in lofts and clubs, with neon lights, booming music, and an atmosphere that made the streets outside feel dull in comparison. Velvet ropes, guest lists, and outrageous outfits set the stage. People wore sequins, leather, feathers, and the kind of bold colors that would turn heads from across the room. It wasn't just about partying. It was about showing up, being noticed, and being part of a scene that mattered. Miami offered a different flavor of wildness. The city pulsed with Latin beats and neon energy, where beachfront mansions hosted pool parties that lasted until dawn. DJs mixed disco, funk, and the emerging sounds of hip-hop and Latin pop, while locals and tourists alike danced under palm trees and glowing lights. Convertible cars lined the streets outside, often carrying late arrivals, while bartenders mixed cocktails with flair, serving drinks that matched the city's bright, indulgent aesthetic. In Miami, the party wasn't confined to a building. It spilled onto the streets, the sand, and even the water, creating an immersive experience unlike anywhere else in the country. Los Angeles had its own version of wild, fueled by Hollywood glamour and ambition. Parties in L.A. were as much about networking as they were about fun. Celebrities mingled with industry insiders, aspiring actors, and musicians in sprawling mansions on Sunset Boulevard, or in private clubs where entry required knowing someone who knew someone. Music was louder than life, with rock, pop, and early hip-hop providing the soundtrack. Fashion was over the top. Big hair, shoulder pads, flashy jewelry, and designer everything. L.A. parties had a sense of theatricality. The city itself encouraged performance, and everyone attending was both audience and actor in the ongoing spectacle. Small towns and suburban areas also had their share of wild parties, though on a different scale. Basements, barns, and backyards became stages for teen gatherings that were often less about luxury and more about freedom. Music blared from boom boxes or car stereos. Kids danced, laughed, and sometimes got into trouble, and every event felt like its own rebellion. These parties weren't curated by event planners. They were spontaneous, messy, and often legendary within the community. Teens experimented with fashion, music, and bands, drawing inspiration from MTV, movies, and older siblings. Even in small towns, the energy of the 1980s was tangible, and every party carried the promise of adventure. One thing all 1980s parties shared was the music. DJs were heroes, spinning vinyl on turntables, blending disco, funk, rock, and the emerging electronic sounds that would later define house and techno. Dance floors were alive with energy, and the beat often dictated the mood, style, and pace of the evening. People didn't just move to music. They became part of it, expressing themselves through dance, clothing, and attitude. Music wasn't background. It was the heart of the party, shaping how everyone interacted, flirted, and socialized. Alcohol and indulgence were staples, though the era's fascination with excess sometimes crossed into dangerous territory. Cocktail culture thrived in urban and beach cities alike. Martinis, rum punches, tequila shots, and mixed drinks with exotic garnishes were common. Bartenders weren't just servers. They were performers, mixing drinks with flair that added to the spectacle. In more private or underground parties, the energy could become chaotic, experimental, and sometimes risky with the desire to push boundaries and experience something unforgettable. Fashion was another defining feature. People dressed to impress, shock, or simply express themselves. Sequins, metallics, bright neons, leather jackets, ripped jeans, leg warmers, teased hair, and bold makeup were everywhere. Shoes were statement pieces, accessories were exaggerated, and even casual wear carried an air of performance. Outfits weren't just clothing. They were part of the narrative, telling the world who you were, what you represented, and how bold you could be. Food, surprisingly, also played a role in parties. In smaller gatherings, snacks and pizzas were staples, keeping energy high for late-night dancing. In larger urban events, catering became part of the spectacle. Shrimp cocktails, hors d'oeuvres, and trays of exotic fruits were served alongside endless drinks, often presented with flair. Partygoers didn't just eat, they socialized, networked, and used food as another way to enjoy and mark the occasion. Party culture in the 1980s wasn't just about nightlife, it was a reflection of broader social trends. The decade was marked by economic optimism for some, the rise of consumerism, and the explosion of media that connected people to trends, music, and fashion in unprecedented ways. Television shows, music videos, and magazines gave people a template for style and social behavior, and parties became living manifestations of that culture. They were the places where pop culture, ambition, and personal expression collided. Some parties were legendary, whispered about in stories that persisted for decades. A rooftop in Manhattan, a secret Miami mansion, or a Hollywood bungalow could host dozens of people who would remember the night forever. These events created shared memories, reinforced identities, and allowed people to test boundaries, flirt with freedom, and create stories that would be recounted for years. The wildness wasn't just about drugs, alcohol, or loud music. It was about the sheer intensity of living fully in that moment, surrounded by people who shared the same desire for excitement, connection, and adventure. Even in retrospect, these parties are fascinating because they were both ephemeral and transformative. They defined social hierarchies, created legends, and influenced culture beyond the night itself. The music, fashion, and energy of these gatherings spread to broader society, influencing films, advertisements, and even everyday life. They were moments in time, intense and fleeting, yet lasting in memory. Ultimately, the wild parties of 1980s America were about more than just fun. They were about freedom, identity, and the pursuit of experience. Whether in the loss of New York, the neon beaches of Miami, Hollywood mansions, or suburban basements, these gatherings captured the spirit of the decade, bold, daring, expressive, and unforgettable. They were spaces where the ordinary became extraordinary, where every night promised something new, and where the culture of an entire era was lived, danced, and remembered. So when you imagine the 1980s, don't just picture the cities, the fashion, or the music. Picture the parties, the chaos, the lights, the soundtracks, the fashion statements, and the people who made it all unforgettable. That is what wild 1980s America truly looked like. Colorful, loud, energetic, and endlessly alive.